verdicts to the point she's reading her impact statement, they're hoping and praying for 1 year. Like 1 year, they're just like, if we can get 1 year, that would be good. Like they go from 6 to 1. And she asks herself, like, when did this power shift? Like everybody was like, he is guilty. He's 100% guilty. And now we have to fight for 1 year.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things that I found just most enraging was actually when and I believe it was a parole officer called her to talk about what she wanted. And she talks about it. And I read this a couple of months ago, so I might be like mincing words, but basically Chanel felt like she just like talked over her and kind of like asked her something about whether she wants him like punished. You know what I mean? Or like, basically like whether or not she's vindictive. And she said no. Yeah. And then later that person gives a recommendation for like the minimum sentencing.
Oh yeah. And that's essentially it, where she completely like twists her words around to basically even be like, even the victim doesn't want him to suffer, like, so based on her,
which is like bullshit.
Information. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Not to suffer. And like, well, there's a big difference.
Right. Cause and she explained, she's like, I'm not like a terrible person, like, I want him to think about his actions and, be able to like learn from that. But like, that does not mean I don't think he should be punished for his actions.
Right. And like, why would I go through all of this?
Right.
If not,
And speaking, one of the most enraging things I actually remember from the trial was like, so she gives her impact statement, and then like her father, or his father, Brock Turner's father, also gives one, talking about like his son's potential and like, basically, like, should he have to go through like all of this for 20 minutes of action? I was just like, I mean, didn't we just go through a trial where we decided that like this was not action, this was not consensual action, like he forced himself on this woman and he was convicted of it? Like,
well, and that's again where you just think that your son is so privileged that he should never have to do punishment. Like if I shoot someone, it doesn't take 20 minutes, but I sure as hell like am gonna go to jail, I don't know.
It's just like to jail for that mistake that only lasted 30 seconds. Like,
right. Like I just don't understand that at all. But yeah, no. And then the other incredibly frustrating thing was it wasn't actually, and I forget how long the jury recommended.
Mm-hmm. So 6 months was his sentencing.
But that wasn't the jury. So the jury actually came back with one recommendation for sentencing, and I think it was like 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was the judge who overruled them.
Yes.
And gave him the minimum.
Yep.
So he actually like overruled the jury of peers and gave him less because of all of his lost potential. And that judge actually was removed by vote in California.
They did do a lot of like polling and stuff to get like signatures on the petition to remove him, and they were successful. So,
and I remember people talking about that and being like, well, he rules on lots of other things, and like, is this a dangerous precedent? And I'm like, no. Like, I'm sick of judges who don't think that sexual assault is serious or rape is serious. Like, fuck you.
Well, and that's what like I think one of the frustrating things about all of this is people think it's like sex, like the boy's father says like 20 minutes of action. Like, you're not thinking of this as assault and a violation. This is a violent crime. Like when people are physically assaulted, they get more time than this shit. You know what I mean? So like that's, I don't know. It is a violation. It is a violent crime. And you can't think of it in like this way that people do, where it's just like, oh, it's just like sex. Like, what harm did that bring?
I remember Chanel too talking about like trying to lock eyes with his mother and his father. Like, you know, I am a person.
Yeah.
Like, not just whatever you've made up in your mind to give your son a pass on this. And I also remember that like I was very frustrated by Brock's sort of apology and his kind of appeal at the sentencing hearing where he talks about like he didn't realize what he had done and blah, 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 blah. And one of the most devastating parts of this book is, you know, Chanel talks about blaming herself and different periods of feeling guilty. Her sister, who she was at this party, went to this party with and separated from for very few minutes before this happened. Her sister blames herself. Her parents blame themselves for letting them go. Her boyfriend blames himself for not being there. And all of these people who care about her are like overrun with guilt. And the only one who doesn't feel fucking bad is the only one responsible. And it's so frustrating for the judge or anyone else to come back and say that he was sorry when he wasn't, you know, like he's the only one who didn't take responsibility for this. And it's just, that was like one of the most frustrating things to read ever.
Right.
And so I,
like after this whole thing, like you cannot be accountable for your actions.
I wrote down, and I mean, this quote is really long and I won't read it all, but one of the things that she says later on is, most of us understand that your future is not promised to you. It is constructed day by day through the choices you make. It is earned little by little through hard work and action. If you don't act accordingly, that dream dissolves. If punishment is based on potential, privileged people will be given lighter sentences. Brock was shielded inside projections of what people like him grow up to become or are supposed to become. She goes on to say, you know, surgeons, Olympians, all-American athletes. And the judge talks about what he's given up, but like, what about if this person isn't privileged? Yeah. You know? And later, and one of the things he said is, I just existed in a reality where nothing could go wrong or nobody could think of what I was doing as wrong. Mm-hmm. And just like this idea of how privileged he is and how much he truly doesn't live in a world without consequence. And he still doesn't. He barely got anything. They think it's so devastating. I loved her actions on that because I feel like, yeah, people are living in two different worlds. Yeah. People like Brock Turner and everyone else who, like she says, doesn't think that your future is promised.
Well, and then, I don't know. So I another thing that I could not believe him and his team did was after he was sentenced to 6 months and only served 3 months, by the way, this motherfucker appeals. Like, it wasn't just over. Like, he appeals, and the appeal eventually, you know, got like denied or whatever, or I don't know. He lost there, but I was just like, like witnesses, like you fucking did this thing, and like you got 3 months, like 6 month sentence, and you served 3 months, and you still appeal, like you got like off like scot-free pretty much. Like, I mean, you're on a list now, but like I like what other better outcome for you could there have been? Like, there couldn't have been one, you know, like you were always going to be fucking guilty, because people saw you doing this. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't believe that they appealed. I think the aftermath, I think this is really, a lot of the powerful moments, I drew from this book was, when she talks about like the aftermath and sort of like healing from it all, and reflecting on it all, like after the trial, for example, she goes to like get frozen yogurt with her friends, her girlfriends or whatever. And they all sort of like just start talking about how they've been like harassed or assaulted. And basically that this 6 months is the closest thing to justice that any one of them have had. And unfortunately that's the more common outcome is no justice, is nothing. Because, you know, most often these things aren't reported, or people aren't believed, or they're very sticky situations where, like what we talked about with She Said, sometimes you can't prove without a doubt, in a court of law that these things happened. So unfortunately, like this is the most justice that anyone's had. I think, to the response to anybody who asks, why didn't they report it sooner or whatever, I think this is a pretty clear example of like a reason why. Because
yeah, everyone should read this book if you want to know why people didn't immediately go to the police.
And she even says that she had everything. She had like physical evidence. She had witnesses. Like this was a like open and shut case. And like the guy only served 3 months. Like what justice is that? Like if that's what she can get with all of these like bulletproof things in her case, like what about people that don't have those things, that don't have witnesses? Because most of the time there's not witnesses to these things.
Yeah, I think this book for me especially, it was just like a really hard reality check on what we would like to believe. And like, I think maybe I have said before in ignorance of like, oh, you need to report it. Like, it needs to be reported. It's important. And it's like after reading, and I'm not saying that it's not, but I just think that like to just blindly say that without taking into account someone's personal mental health and like well-being and how much more traumatizing that is going to be for them. And I'm not saying that's never the right way to go. It's just not necessarily always or like a blanket right way to go.
It's definitely not an easy way to go by any means, like, I mean, because not only does she not get like that justice, but she's also like dragged and doubted and poked and prodded, and like, like her character is put on trial instead of his, so like there's a lot of emotional turmoil there, that you go to, where it is like almost like you're being put on trial and not the person that did these things to you.
Right.
And so I think that's, I don't know, it's not a thing that I think people consider all the time. However, talking about like reporting it or not, I think she kind of addresses that too, where she talks about like, I never thought, why me? And she's almost like glad that it was her and not like her sister or like another 18-year-old that was at that party that it probably would have happened to if it wasn't her. Where she was saying that like she, she's kind of more grown, I guess. She was in a place in her life emotionally, especially where she was able to like handle that
and be supported by people who love her.
Right. And I don't know, I think just being able to like take that burden for these other women is kind of what she's saying. And I thought that was, and I will also just add that I listened to this on audio, which I thought was amazing because you can tell there's certain parts that you can hear her voice kind of like wavering and crack a little bit. And it's not maybe parts that you might think. It's not parts where she's describing like the actual assault or anything like that, but it's in moments like this where she's talking about, like if she could take on this burden, like for other women, she's glad to do it. And like, I don't know, I feel like it's just like highlighting the selflessness she has in this whole situation. And also hearing the support from other people. Too, she gets really emotional whenever she gets all that feedback from whenever her impact statement goes viral.
Yeah, that part was really powerful. Just kind of like getting to watch her, see how she reacts to like all of these people reacting to how she could so eloquently describe an experience that a lot of people have had.
Yeah.
And also that a lot of people haven't and felt for her. I also listened to it on audio. And so I read that impact statement when it went viral at the time.
Same.
And then so to take this like incredibly powerful read anonymously and you know, reading it on a screen, probably like at work, and then being like, holy shit, I didn't know what I was